Hey everybody. So we're going to take a look at Stonehenge. We're going to hop over there and take a look at it for a little bit because of a couple reasons. Number one, because it's going to give us something kind of new to look at, but also because of the things that I've been exploring, and it just keeps expanding. I think Stonehenge is a great place to look, and I think we're going to see some pretty amazing geometry there. But I have to think back about where all this started, and I had to think about it for just a second because it's really expanded into something quite large. This all started pretty much with the whole Star of David symbol, because the Star of David symbol, when you take a look at Christ on the cross, you always see his arms stretched out, and he's actually in the shape of what looks like a Y. Okay, and so after looking at symbolism, I determined that they had his arms at a certain angle. And if I show you some of that real quick, this video may be a little bit longer than normal, but you probably need to see some of this so that you can kind of catch up and get a good idea of what's going on. So crucifixion. And this is a good example right here. If you take a look, you see how his arms are raised like this. This is the same kind of position that Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man was in as well. And we all know that Metatron's cube was used in Vitruvian Man. And we also know that people like Salvador Dali did crucifixion with the hypercube, with Christ. Okay, so we have a cube, we have the Star of David, or Metatron's cube with Vitruvian Man, and we have this recurring symbolism that we kind of see right here. And so this is kind of what led me into this symbolism. So as during my exploration of this symbolism, I came across this particular alchemist, and I knew when I came across him that I was onto something big. Number one, the reason why is because you can't find this stuff, and this was done in 1670. I've looked for PDFs and things like this. You can't find this book, at least I haven't been able to, on the internet. The only place you can find pictures and pages of it is on the usnavy.mil site. So I jumped on there, and if you notice where it says rare book in capital letters. It's called Curious Mathematical Forms by Robert Boyle, and it was done in 1670. So, also in combination with looking at Boyle, I've been looking a lot at Stephen Phillips on the SM Phillips. So we go there real quick. And we take a look, for example, sacred geometry, and we take a look at the Tree of Life. And we see the Tetractys all of a sudden. We see this, another version of the cube. And we see that this stuff is embedded in the Tree of Life. And we know that the Christ on the cross is another image of the Tree of Life. So, and then we have these four worlds, and the four worlds keep coming up in the alchemy drawings and stuff like that. Okay, so this is very esoteric stuff, but this particular geometry that we see right here is, unless you know what you're looking at, it just looks like pretty designs, but there's something to it. And this video is going to basically introduce you to what I've been looking at with Robert Boyle, because the patterns and things that I've noticed that I've seen in architecture, and I'll even show you that this same type of thing that we're seeing right here is going to also be found in the real bona fide crop circles and the geometrical patterns that we see there. The same type of imagery, the same type of symbolism, like the phanoplane and the Star of David and Metatron's cube and the nesting function that's happening, and this type of thing that I've showed you with the Great Pyramid and all this kind of stuff. The ring system is something that I've been looking at a lot lately. And if you take a look at these, you see these Stars of David that he's got right here, and these phanoplanes and stuff. there is a ring system associated with this all. And let's take a look at a few of his drawings here real quick. I've got some open here. And you see the way that these rings, kind of ripple into each other like this. This is exactly the kind of thing I was showing you when I showed you stuff when I was looking at the Great Pyramid, and I would nest a larger set of circles. I would like shrink them down to 50% and put them on top of some that are already there, and they would create patterns like this. Let me show you an example of that real quick. So here's an image of mine on the left here that I created a while back, just a standard image to see what it would look like when I did this kind of stuff. And I didn't have, I decided to fill in the circles and leave them a little bit transparent because I wanted to get the effect of what it would look like when they kind of rippled into each other, like kind of what we see right here. So if you look at these right here, you can kind of see that if you look close up, kind of what happens, these edges, the way that they touch each other, almost kind of like gears is what they look like. And this happens when you take, like for example, these outer ones that we have right here. Instead of just making the fruit of life with one circle, I layered them with a certain pattern. This pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you think of the 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of think of the four worlds or something like that in your head. If you want to think of geometry alone, well, you can kind of think of something when we think of the angles that triangles create. For example, there is a 3, 4, 5 triangle that you can create by using different size circles. Here's an example of that right here. So if we take 3 circles, and some might want to call this a 3, 6, 9 or a version of it as an example, because these circles are a third. So the diameter of this large circle is 6, this one is 4, and this one's 2. So they're obviously thirds. So we could skip that all the way up to 1,000 if we wanted to, if we're talking about pixels. And we could do 1,000, 2,000, and 3,000. And we put them together like this and drew straight lines from the midpoint, would actually create a 3, 4, 5 triangle. Now, 3, 4, 5 triangle is extremely important because those are the triangles the Great Pyramid is made out of. And the different size circles and the nesting that is created from those circles has done things like I've showed you, like the pyramid, for example, the angles or the slope of the pyramid would rest on, say, a large circle, but then the slope of it would rest on, say, the next size smaller circle, and so on and so on. And we see this kind of thing happening, but it really happens when you start nesting the stuff. And until you nest this stuff, you don't get the same kind of results. And here's an example of kind of what I'm talking about right here. The same nesting that I was showing you with those various circles, if we took this whole thing right here and we reduced it by 50%, and it shrinks it up and it puts it in the very middle of the diagram here, and you can see that the large circle here and this next size smaller one, and where they're placed, creates the slope of the pyramid. Okay, now I think this has a lot to do with the geometry that we're seeing in these particular images and stuff. So that is one thing that I thought was important to show you, and the fact that it creates things like this gives us more information about why they're actually doing that and why these different circles are different sizes. But there is something even more important about it, and that has to do with these ancient sites, like we're going to see with Stonehenge. And if you are wondering whether or not sacred geometry or these crop circles here and what they're doing, which is basically the same thing that we see right here, these crop circles are the real deal. And I never paid that much attention to them until I started getting into the whole meaning behind this type of geometry, which is extremely esoteric. It has something to do with the cosmos, reality. It also has to do with man himself. And so I see this geometry in all of these various ancient sites, and we see it in the architecture. So this is kind of what this is about. And Robert Boyle opened my eyes a little bit further to some of the stuff by showing me what he's doing out here in some of these images. For example, here's a phaneroplane and what it looks like. And when we take a look at sacred geometry on Stephen Phillips' site, we see that stuff like this, the 7 planets that also have to do with the chakras of your in your body, and all this stuff is related, and so it's cosmic as well as what it has to do with man. If you remember, there's a recent video of mine called "The Real Sun" that the Grand Master of the Knights Templar actually shared on his Facebook because he liked it. There's a brief part with him at the very beginning where he discusses that these temples, these cathedrals in Christianity, and we'll see this all the way up until probably the mid-1700s. These various cathedrals, some of them were built in the same manner as the architecture of man. When you take a look at where they're faced, if you take a look at the various cathedrals and their floor plans, you'll find out that about 90% of the time, the old cathedrals are always to where the head area, if I can find any with a compass on it, here's one. So the high altar being up here, and you can see this is kind of shaped like a man, right? The high altar up here is always faced towards the east, okay, and the west is towards the feet area. And this is pretty much the same for all of these cathedrals. But the Grand Master of the Knights Templar goes into this at the very first part of the video. He knows who built these cathedrals. They were called the Children of Solomon, and these other guilds. And these go all the way back into ancient times. These are Gnostics and stuff like that. And there's a bunch of esoteric information around all of this stuff that very, very few people know about. I know about it only because of heavy digging and heavy research, and I'm probably only scratching the surface about what I know, but it's amazing, some of the stuff that you'll find. So anyways, and then after this, he talks about these cathedrals being laid out like man. Then Manly Hall goes into the idea that all these cathedrals are also built with the solar system built into the architecture. So there's 2 things going on. Okay, so we have them like man, and we have them like the solar system or the cosmos. And the reason why this is because man and the cosmos are very similar. And this is the reason why we see these ancient temples like this. And what we'll see with Stonehenge is that it's also faced the area that would be moving up or towards the head or forward is towards the northeast. And on these cathedrals, you see that the same thing happens, is they're always to the east and sometimes to the northeast, up here at the very top. So, with that, let's take a look at a few images from Robert Boyle, and then I want to show you kind of what I've been studying, because I've been studying Metatron's cube, its relationship to man, and the rings around it. Because these rings that we see around it are very special when it comes to understanding reality. Because Metatron's cube has a function where it nests cubes within inside itself. And when you understand what it's trying to communicate, it's communicating levels of reality, or dimensions, or levels of consciousness. Okay, for example, we're in the lowest. We're in number 4. We're in Asiya. This is the physical. And when you move above that, you move into what's called mind. Okay, and this can all be broken down just as if you kind of, the same way psychologically, as you would think about, like, for example, the very top of it would be a flash of an idea comes into your head, and then that flash of an idea yields thinking, digging, searching, which eventually leads to the creation of something physical. The same thing can be said by the worlds as well, but some things we just can't explain about it, like the archetypes. This goes all the way back into Plato and the mysteries, and Plato was taught in Sais, Egypt, stuff like this. So very esoteric stuff. These ancient temples were not machines. They were knowledge bases. They were to show either themselves, to help themselves learn about the solar system themselves and so forth. And I think on a lot of cases, probably to leave them there and make sure that people, after they were gone, were able to learn the same things. And of course, now we have crop circles to help us as well. Of course, you have to be able to spot the ones that aren't good, but they are the real deal, and they are showing us information that's surrounding this type of stuff. So one of the things that I've really been interested in looking at on these is that the proportions that he's using on these particular rings. And one of the things that I've noticed that you'll find in just about every single one of them is there's a couple of things happening. There's a nesting of a 50% reduction between the larger on the outside and what you see kind of in the middle area, right? But then when you kind of get down to the middle area and the lower area, you see there's kind of a repeated thing where you have this ring here. It's kind of like you have one here and you have one here, and if you reduce it down far enough, you have the same proportion down here at the very bottom. So it's almost like a thick ring that you see running around this area right here. And this seems to be something that he is repeating throughout these particular images. That same ring system you can see right here, and there's kind of one below it. See, there's another one right here. And then here we've got some obvious clues about what's going on, because we can see that he's nesting the Star of David, which is kind of like another version of a cube, if we look at it and think of it that way. And he's got all these rings around it. And this is kind of the reason you've seen me experimenting, showing you with this. And this particular image is the images that I'm going to show you today. I'm not going to go too far into this, but I did want to give you a good introduction to kind of what's going on here, because I don't see anybody else out there really digging or exploring into this. I don't care so much about why they built these temples, how they built these temples, as much as why. I want to know the knowledge. I want to understand what they're trying to communicate to us. Because I think if we understand that, we'd understand how to build them, right? But I think it takes a certain type of person to be able to look at this kind of stuff. If you're the kind of person that is pie in the sky and your head's in the clouds and stuff like that, you won't be able to do it. If you're too scientific and you're not willing to look at anything that is beyond what you've learned in your university, then you're also going to be screwed. You have to have a certain amount of creativity. You have to be able to recognize and have enough intuition and say something's going on there, because I see a pattern in this geometry here, in the crop circles, and the architecture. Something's going on. I see some repetitivity. I'm going to go ahead and dig into it. Okay, you've got to have that kind of attitude. This is the one I wanted to show you, and this is kind of this is very important right here. We see the Star of David, and you see these two rings here. You see one ring that is going around the outside of this hexagon here, right? And then you see another ring on the very end, just on the inside of it. Now, what this signifies, and I was right, because when I found this, I was like, aha! And I'm glad that I took the time to kind of put him aside for a second and just go experiment by myself, because what it allowed me to do is with trial and error kind of figure out what I thought was important, what I didn't think was not so important. And then after I did all of that, until I was frustrated, Then I went and took a look at him, and I was like, okay, so he thinks the same thing. He's actually got it in a drawing here. So these two rings that you see repeated in certain octaves have to do with a boundary between worlds. So if we take a look at the inside ring right here on the inside of this hexagon, that would be the world that's inside the cube of this larger one here. And when you break through that, when you break through this ring and you move up to this one, you're moving from inside this boxed in area to outside of it. And this happens 4 times, right? Because we have Absolute, we have Bria, we have Yetzirah, and we're in Asiya, right? So when we nest these cubes, we'll see this repeated thing like this happening. And this is what brought me to, I was like, I know something that looks almost just like that. And I see this kind of stuff in crop circles, and it looks to me like this could very well be something related to Stonehenge. And so I'm just going to show you a brief image on that. I'm not going to go into detail because we're already at 21 minutes, and we'll pick up next time. But I kind of wanted to show you real quick what became of this. So in here I brought in his image because I wanted to take a look, because he's done this geometry, and you know, these ancients, they were very meticulous with these large megastructures with the geometry. So if we take a look at this and we take a look at Stonehenge, and I'll just turn it on real quick and place it on top of it, we'll see that Stonehenge, and this is a diagram taken from Wikipedia, we can see that Stonehenge fits in here perfectly. And the outer stones that we see here. Now remember, whatever has been said or found about this cosmically, whether it be summer solstices or what have you, remember that it's not separate from the human condition, because they're all interrelated. To understand the universe is to understand man. To understand man is to understand the universe. So they're all related. Okay. So with that in mind, if you take a look here, you can see that these larger stones are on the outer ring, which means that if we take a look at this from that perspective, they're in the larger cube. And these guys right here, which is kind of like a repeated version of them, are on the inside. And then we have this interesting thing right here, which looks like it's another octave. So, and it is. And so let me show you kind of what it looks like. Okay, so there is Robert Boyle's image. So we'll turn him off real quick. And there's our picture of Stonehenge. So what we'll do is we'll zoom in real quick here. And so I've got these cubes that are nested, and we're going to see that they're octaves, that they're playing with this thing. So they're nesting cubes just like I thought. So here's your first one. And I'm going to show you how all this makes sense here in just a second, but if you take a look at this U shape that you see right here, you see this, this is another cube right here, this smaller guy, right? And then you have this larger guy, and if you notice, we have those two rings. We have the one on the inside of the hexagon right here, and we have the one on the outer part of the hexagon right here. So if we add our next octave of, here we go, our next cube, okay, then we can see that these right here are on the outer part of this hexagon. So we can see that they are actually nesting these things. Okay. So if we take a look at this thing, we can obviously see that it is hexagonal because there's some definite things that they are using in the geometry. For example, if you notice on each of these star points, you can see there's a gap right in the middle of these stones that allows them to go in. You can also see that there is an even amount of stones on the inside for each area. For example, let's take a look at this. On each large star point, right, we have one on the corner here, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have one on the corner, and that repeats all the way around. When we take a look on the inside, it's also repeating, and we can also see clear indicators that they're using this geometry. Okay, for example, these two little stones right here, if you notice, these stones are a lot of times they're placed on lines, this line moving all the way up here to this point, which would be the way out. So this up here would be east, this would be the northeastern part. We're actually faced northeast right now with this U shape. But anyway, if you take a look at the stones, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can see that they are always placed equally around here. So the geometry of this thing is basically almost perfect. If you notice these larger ones that we see right here, the 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, they do not exceed this line of the larger cube right here. And this is something that we see in Mary, the Ark of the Covenant, where Mary's up here and Christ is down here. And you'll notice they always have those halos and rings around their head in just about every single one of those images. I wish I could find one. I had them open, but anyways, I'll show you next time. But if you take a look at these stones, you can see that they're following the lines of the geometry. This altar that you see right here is sitting right here. So if we're thinking about the chakra system or whatever, if you remember that alchemical drawing I showed you where we had the triangle, where we had the globe and it was bound in a box, and that box was bound by a triangle, and that triangle just so happens to be the golden triangle because it's at 72 degrees. In the Metatron's cube that we have here, this particular triangle is not quite phi, but I will show you kind of how it works out after I show you the octaves real quick on this thing. So you can see that the geometry of this thing is basically, I mean, you can see that it is right on line. You can see both sides, they don't exceed this line right here, and you can see that this triangle, this 72 degrees roughly, as you go up to here, this is when you break out of this area and you move into the next world. Okay, so that's how it works. So let's take a look at the octaves real quick. Okay, so real quick, let's just take a look. I've got an actual image of Stonehenge here, and I've got it on top of this thing. And the purpose of this is to kind of show you how their geometry is working with this ring system. You notice this ring system that you see right here and these two rings close together, and you see this larger ring. This is kind of what we were seeing in Robert Boyle and some of these other images. Okay, so if we add our lines from our cube again, we'll add the smaller one, and then we'll add the next larger one. And then here's where it really becomes obvious, because when we go to the next octave, you can see now that this particular hexagon, this one is now bounding this dark ring that we see right here. So this dark ring that we see right here is a ring, and if we and it's bound inside the hexagon. So if we move it to 50%, then we would expect to see one inside this hexagon. Move that to 50%, we'd see one inside this hexagon, so on and so on. And the same would occur for these rings that we see outside of the hexagons. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at these octaves, and I'll show you how they work real quick, and then I'll let you go, I think, because we're at 30 minutes already, so there's just a lot of information to talk about on this. So you notice how these rings, so this is twice as big as this. Let's turn these rings on real quick. And what you'll see is that I've got a ring on the outside of the hexagon and one on the inside. You can see the one on the inside matches what we see on this dark ring. Now, in order for you to be able to see this a little bit better, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And if I take these two rings here, okay, and remember we were already on top of that actual footage. So this is already matched up, okay? If I take these two and I reduce them by 50%, then what I get is I get the same pattern right here. This one and this one. One on the outside of the hexagon, one on the inside. And if I reduce those by 50%, I get the exact two bright ring pattern that you see right inside Stonehenge, right here, between the large ones and the smaller ones. And you'll also notice that there's a hexagon right there, which is another cube. And that one ring is on the larger stones are on the outer part of it, and the smaller stones are on the inside of the hexagon, okay? And then if we do the ring system one more time, another 50%, then we get this middle area right here. So you can see this is all done in octaves. You can see that the geometry is repeating, because if we just scale it by 50% each time, you can see that they perfectly are matching what's going on right here. So they're using Metatron's cube, just like these other guys are. Metatron's cube, remember, it generates all of the basic Platonic solids. You can see them all when you look at Metatron's cube if you know how to look at them. And this is where this is all going. I've got a lot more to show you on this, but since it's already 32 minutes into this, I'm going to go ahead and let you go for right now. And I did want to show you one more thing, and that is the golden triangle real quick and the harmony with that, okay, because if you're right in here and we want to break out to this area up here, okay, and if we turn on our golden triangle, I must have moved that a little bit. No, it's still pretty good. Yeah. Let me just take the larger. Yeah, that's a little bit easier to see now. So if we take a look at the octaves and the rings, what's really interesting about this is that where this ends up is inside Stonehenge in the world of Assia. This would be kind of like the first part, but we're still in Assia until we break through this boundary right here and move out of it. And then as you can see, the harmony of this thing as it moves up all the way to the top. And this is the same thing that we saw in the alchemical drawing, people standing inside the globe. So this is kind of where all this is going. So I wanted to show you all this, show you some of the diagrams from Robert Boyle, why I'm looking at it, and just how esoteric this stuff is. And when you take a look at these crop circles and you see the information that they're showing you, this kind of geometry that you see right here is important. It's important geometry. If the crop circle is a good crop circle, there's information, some kind of information that I haven't completely figured out how to decode yet. I just know that it's important, and I'm aware of some aspects of what some of it means, but I'm still kind of trying to figure all of it out. But I can tell you it's extremely important. It has something to do with reality, the cosmos, yourself, architecture, all kinds of stuff. And they are universals that they are embedding, and they're putting on crop circles out there. And so if you weren't a crop circle fan, you might think about looking into them when you see this kind of geometry right here. So anyways, that kind of shows you a little bit about Stonehenge, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. When I think about what I'm going to put together next for you regarding this, I'll put out another video, but this was a pretty long one. So you guys take care. Talk to you soon.